Hello and welcome to our very first broadcast here at the Fundamental Perspective Podcast, a part of the Fundamental Perspective blog. This is our opening day, and we are pleased to have with us, honored to have with us, Evangelist Wil Rice. Brother Rice is the president of the Bill Rice Ranch down in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Brother Wil, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
Well, tell us a little bit about the Bill Rice Ranch.
Bill Rice Ranch was started in 1950 because of a burden my grandparents had to reach deaf people for the Lord. My aunt is deaf, and so when she was still just a young girl, they began to be very burdened that there were no ministries, no churches, no one that was giving the gospel to deaf people in a way that they could understand. In those days, there was very little awareness of deaf people and the need there in society at large, or even among those that had a burden to give out the gospel. So one day it occurred to them that if they had a burden to do something about it, they were the ones to do it. And so they bought an old dormant ranch in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. In 1950, they started camp 3 years later and invited deaf young people to come free of charge. And today, of course, we have weeks for hearing young people, hearing adults, deaf young people. They come from all over, and they come in the fall and the spring as well as the summer.
How many do you typically have in a week?
In the summer, we can have a few hundred every week. We have 3 programs that run simultaneously. We have a program for deaf that is a deaf camp, and they come free of charge, always have. We have elementary age boys and girls. We can handle about 200 elementary age boys and girls at a time, and then we have a program for teenagers. And the John Rice Auditorium would seat 800. We usually have anywhere from 400 to 700 young people on the ranch any given week, and that can vary from week to week, but generally several hundred. And then we have, as I've mentioned, shorter camps, 3-day camps in throughout the rest of the year. And of course, the camping ministry is one part of the ranch. That is, the ranch is a revival ministry whose purpose it is to give the gospel and encourage churches that want to do that. And so the ranch is not it's not a camp that has ministry. It's a ministry that uses camp among other avenues to reach people.
Okay. Well, in this age, the question to be asked is why, as a youth pastor or as a pastor, I'm looking at my youth group, why should I send them to any sort of Christian camp, whether it's a ranch or other good Christian camps? Why can't I spark a revival or spark more spiritual interest in my youth group simply by teaching the Word of God faithfully each week, investing my life in them? Why do I have to travel all the way down to Tennessee or any other camp?
Right.
Why would I have to do that? What's the advantage of going to a Christian camp?
Well, obviously you don't have to, and clearly it would be great if everyone could say, hey, we're in a perpetual state of revival. I think most of us would be hard-pressed to say that. If you're already vived, then you don't need to be revived. But unfortunately, because we are flesh, there is a need for God to revive our hearts, to work in our hearts, to make us more useful, and for people to be saved. Obviously, churches should be burdened about that, and if someone's thinking is, well, hey, we can do that here, that's good if that is their desire and their intent and what they're shooting for. The advantage of camp is that you can take care of a lot of distractions that you typically cannot take care of somewhere else. For instance, we hold a number of revival meetings, that is, special weeks of meetings in local churches throughout the year. And any church I've ever been privileged to preach in, there are a whole slew of things that I don't have any control over. The pastor has no control over. Indeed, people don't. For instance, every night this week where I'm preaching, in so many words, I've encouraged people about coming back the next night. Pastor has done as much. I'm competing with all kinds of media before and after the service, rotten television, 45 minutes after we say the last amen. People who have worked all day and are bone tired, long distances, people that are hungry. We had revival meetings at my home church recently. I was not preaching. A visiting evangelist was doing that, but I was reminded of how difficult it is to drive to church, be there, be involved in the meetings. There are a lot of distractions. No matter how good the preaching, no matter how much has gone into it, if people are sleeping or distracted, preaching is minimized.
Right.
So at camp, we use an acrostic to describe camp at Bill Rice Ranch and related ministries, CAMP, a controlled atmosphere for the ministry of preaching. And what that means is, in a nutshell, that you can't ever do this in a perfect way, obviously, this side of heaven, but there are a lot of things that you can control in a camping atmosphere that typically you could not. What time people get up, go to bed, how much sleep they receive. You can make sure they're fed. You can control, to some extent, the kind of influences that come to bear on anyone's mind. In short, you can maximize opportunities for preaching the truth to help people. As to what time you have the services, how much time you give to the services, the way you prepare for the services, all those things are things that camp can be a real help in doing.
Now, how could you distinguish controlling the atmosphere for the ministry of preaching, as you said? How would you distinguish that from manipulating children to get a decision from them? Because one of the common, again, I guess it's all about common objections.
Sure, yeah.
Is, well, yeah, sure. You'll sit in the services and everything's orchestrated so that the child will make a decision, and then 2 weeks later everything falls apart. So it wasn't really real. It was based on emotion. How do we distinguish between what the ranch is doing and that objection,
Sure,
that misnomer?
Oh boy, that's a very good question. One, I'd have to concede offhand that yes, that can happen. That can happen anywhere. In fact, probably both of us and a number of people that may be listening have been in situations where instead of relying on God's power to convict or convince people of a decision that needs to be made, people rely on manipulation, and quite frankly, that can be done in a camp setting, a high school retreat for a weekend, without being crass here, sleep deprivation, a number of other things that are designed, I don't think intentionally, in other words, no one intends to manipulate, but intentionally or otherwise, yes, in any context, people can be manipulated. That's true with the methodology sometimes of a public invitation. Having said that, that depends on how you use the advantages that you have. So, while people can be manipulated, camp is not, or should not be about manipulation. It should be about controlling an atmosphere where the truth is heard and then decisions can be made. As to decision sticking when you get home, I think it's a little bit of a fable that if someone doesn't stick with the decision they've made, they didn't mean it. I don't think that's true. Making things right with God does not automatically give one character.
Right.
Nor does being saved automatically give one character. If battles were not a real part of being a child of God, then you could cut out a lion's share of the epistles in the New Testament that warn believers, not make-believers, clearly believers, against sins that would make any of us blush and should be shocking, but are not, because they're part of a daily struggle that every one of us live with in the flesh. So to say that because a decision is not maintained once one goes home is because they didn't mean it, I think it's a cliche. No, I think if someone, in my thinking, if someone makes a decision, either he does or he doesn't. It's not a matter of he didn't really make a decision. Either he did or he didn't. If he did, he's going to need some follow-up. He's going to need someone to help him when he gets back home. And that's one of many reasons why the ranch relies so very heavily on local churches. That is, our purpose is to help local churches. We work through local churches. The adults that bring young people stay and work very closely with young people throughout the week from their local church. It helps with follow-up, and I could say more about that if you wish, but it helps with follow-up. It helps young people know, hey, people from my church can be a help to me. Right. As opposed to, well, the Bill Rice Ranch, they're the experts with young people. If we can just get them to Tennessee, then we'll be okay. No, that's not the case. So follow-up is vitally important. And yes, there's a big difference between manipulation and creating an atmosphere where the truth can be heard.
Now, along those lines, there are two things that I've heard that distinguishes the ranch from other camp ministries. One is exactly what you said, the emphasis on preaching. Second is is what you just mentioned about unity within the church, unity within the youth group. How does the ranch do that?
Another good question. The ranch, again, we try to do this in a number of ways, none of which, of course, is perfectly done. There are continually times that we think, hey, we could do this better. Right. We could start something. We could end something. It's humbling to be reminded how often that you can do things that are actually counterproductive to your purpose. But as to unity, it's very important. No evangelist worth his weight in salt thinks that he can help a local church by dividing the church membership.
Right.
To the contrary, the right, revival will produce the right kind of unity. So from the time a church comes to the time they leave, they are functioning as a church. What is a church? It's a body. What is a body? It's a unit. And so a church operates as such when they come to camp. On the first night of camp, we introduce groups by church. In the youth weeks in particular, there is an interstate sports competition. People that know about the ranch know primarily about the sports competition. There are a number of things that kids can do, more than they can do in a week, a lot of which is not sports, but none of the other activities are as purposeful as a sports competition for a number of reasons, one of which is it helps promote preparation before you come to camp, and it promotes unity at camp. There are music competitions, generally by church. Again, individuals come all the time, that's fine, but I will tell you that an individual will not benefit from camp as much as an individual with a church will, because no matter how much the ranch is a help to that person, when they go back home, they need to be plugged into a church. And we want to maximize the possibility of that from the very get-go by working through churches. So cabins are by church. Churches stay together. They play together. They are in the cabin together. They're involved in cabin cleanup together. In short, they maintain a very strong church identity, which is not hurtful to the churches as a group. In fact, pastors come, enjoy fellowship. Youth pastors come, enjoy fellowship one with another. And that, I think it's quite honestly, I think it is, I think it's false to think that is mutually exclusive to building church unity. Right. I think church and youth group unity is primary, and fellowship with other churches is a great byproduct of that, not in competition with that.
Would you consider the Bill Rice Ranch to be a parachurch ministry, and would that be a bad thing?
Well, it'd be better to define what we do as opposed to use a word that is obviously, it has connotations, it's very charged. If you mean parachurch by what the word actually means, which is alongside a church, then yes, our job is to come alongside churches and help them. If you're talking in the context of parachurch, paramilitary, paramedic, no, because quite honestly, that very phrase is used to deride any ministry that attempts to come alongside a church the way the ranch has and help a church. So yes, the ranch is a ministry who has no reason for existence if it's not to help churches and come alongside churches and encourage them, just like I would be privileged to do if I were preaching at a church that's not my own. I'm there to help, to come alongside, to encourage and strengthen the hands of those that are involved in ministry there. And that's what the ranch does, and that's what camp can do.
Right. Well, what kind of it's almost a stupid question, but what accountability as the president of the ranch do you have? You're not under a local church per se. So who would you answer to?
We answer to a number of churches. That is, every church that comes to the ranch. We have a board, as you might imagine, but it's very much the same kind of accountability that any pastor or preacher or evangelist or missionary would have, which is to say we are accountable to the people whom we serve. There's nobody that can say, I'm not accountable. I'm the man of God. I'm not accountable. Unfortunately, that has been an attitude of a lot of people. A man is a pastor or an evangelist, and he is seen as an authority that has no authority save God. And the truth is, if you don't obey the authorities God has placed in your life, you're not obeying the authority either. That simply, it doesn't hold water. So, does a pastor answer to authority? Sure he does. At least he should. Does a missionary? Likewise, yes he does. Do I answer to authorities? Yes, of course. The ranch has anywhere from 15 to 25 local churches on a regular basis that come, and I can tell you that any one of them do and can call me up and say, hey, I've got a question about this, or hey, I've got a concern, or hey, this is great, this has been an encouragement.
Well, the very fact that you're sitting here answering these questions.
Sure, yes, to some extent, sure.
Like, really. Well, the ranch has been in existence now for 50 years, celebrating your 50th anniversary of ministry. As the one kind of running the show here now, the next 50 years, what are your hopes, what are your dreams with this ministry?
Our hopes would be the same as they've always been. The dreams would be the same as they've always been, but maybe in added and new venues. The purpose of the ranch has been from the very beginning a revival ministry to help God's people to turn back to Bible principles. I've been asked recently, and I think it's a fair question, what about schools going to year-round schooling? What about different things that are happening that would seem to minimize the tool of camping? In my view, that will only increase, not minimize, because of our busy lives. People need a place where they can get apart and be apart and rest more now than ever before. It's, by the way, nothing new. Churches have done this for many years, and especially in the early years of this country, there were what were called brush arbor meetings or camp meetings. That has maybe a little bit different connotation now than it did 100 years ago, but the purpose has been and was that people were able to get away from their daily lives and be able to focus on what's important and eternal. I think that will only be more important as the days go on. If schools went year-round tomorrow universally and we could not have camp all summer the way we do now, the ranch would still have ministry, because the ranch's purpose is to reach people and encourage churches in their ministry to do the same. That's why we sponsor an outreach, an evangelistic outreach to New York City each year. That's why there are a number of evangelists that base in different capacities from the ranch, make their home there when they're off the road. So I think we have thought about perhaps starting other camp ministries, as we have in Arizona 15 years ago, more than 15 years ago. 1989 we started the West Branch of Bill Rice Ranch in northern Arizona. We have thought about other opportunities. We have had opportunity to help in camps in the Philippines for 25 years now. And so most of what we could talk about right now would be a matter of specifics, right, and specific avenues, not the main purpose. The main purpose has never changed. The specific ways of doing that are almost endless. Right. So I'm thrilled about the coming years, and I'm excited because I think, again, if camping as a method became obsolete tomorrow, that would be okay, because there would still be a need. There would be a need to help churches in the way that we are, to come alongside them in the way that we are, and there would be other ways to control an atmosphere for the ministry of preaching, although right now I think camping as a method is a prime example, and probably will only increase in the days ahead.
Now, probably the most unique aspect of the ranch ministry is ministry to the deaf. Explain us. You mentioned it a little bit already, but how did that come to be?
Well, as I alluded to earlier, in the late 30s, my grandparents had moved from their home in Texas to Chicago, My granddad was studying for the ministry there, and it was there that their first child, just a baby, came down with spinal meningitis, and she was so ill that she was not expected to live. She did, but she was left deaf, and so my grandparents were concerned that even though they were reaching other people's children literally around the country and other places, their own daughter had never heard the gospel. One day my granddad was complaining, and he said, there are millions of deaf in the country and no one's is doing anything to reach them. And my grandmother said, well, don't you know who's going to reach the deaf? And he said, no. She said, well, I do. And he said, well, I wish you'd tell me. She said, you are, and I'm going to help you. And so basically it was at that point where they realized that if you have a burden to do something and God has given you that burden, then you're the one that's responsible to do something about it. We have, a recognition, most of us, that people in lands where the gospel has not been widespread would know nothing of the gospel. But the truth is, we have many deaf young people on a regular basis that come to the ranch that have never heard the gospel. In some cases, don't even know who Jesus is, and it's not because they're dumb, or because they're just intrinsically ignorant. It's because no one has taken the time. All of us know what we know because someone has told us, and unless someone takes the time to tell a deaf young person the good news of the gospel in his language, he'll never hear it. He'll never know it. So the ranch has been involved in Weeks for the Deaf in Tennessee, of course in northern Arizona. We have rented a number of camps in years past up in New England. A missionary named Bob Himes has been running camps, as I've mentioned, for 25 years in the Philippines. All of these deaf young people come to these camps free of charge, and the main purpose is evangelistic. And of course we have weeks for deaf adults, which would not just be evangelistic, but would also be to help them grow. And of course we preach Christian growth for deaf young people, but the primary need to this good day for the vast majority of deaf teenagers is just hearing the gospel. They've never heard it in their language. And so that's Nathan McConnell is director of deaf ministries at Bill Rice Ranch. He is organizing a number of events this year for deaf friends, both young and adults as well.
Well, Brother Will, I'd like to thank you for coming with us and joining with us today. Some of you don't know, but I have been freezing Brother Will to death here. These Southerners aren't used to our cold weather, and I love things freezing myself, so I just realized my air conditioner was on, and it's only probably about 50 degrees outside. So been grilling him and freezing him, and I've already been taking up too much of his time. He's going to head back to a revival down in Connecticut, and in fact, this just a quick personal testimony was at this church, Galilean Baptist Church. They had a camp ministry there.
That's right.
And where I went forward, and I had committed my life to the Lord, and that took me from being a nominal Christian to a Christian who was now dedicated. And over 10 years later, here I am in Christian ministry. So these decisions, they're not necessarily things that aren't going to stick and are just going to fade away. But you'll never know how the Lord will use a ministry such as the ranch. And from personal testimony, I've heard many times over and over, the ranch has been doing that for now 50 years. And Brother Wood, just quickly tell us, how can we learn more information about the ranch? How can we contact you?
Okay, good. We have two ways, I guess, primarily. One would be to call the ranch. You get information sent to you. And there is a toll-free number, and that is 1-800-253-RICE, 253-RICE. The other would be to go on the website, which is www.billriceranch.org.
And that'll be linked for you on the front page of our blog this week. And thank you, Brother Will, again for coming on the program.
Hey, thanks for your time.
Thank you for listening, and have a great rest of your day.